Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Similar to 2003 to 2008, and it's a beginning of that cycle. Madhu, I want to start with you first. How do you see this capex cycle going, and is it similar to the 2003 2008 cycle?
First of all, thank you for having me. I would say this cycle will surely be better than what we experienced between 2003 and 2008. And I would emphasize that qualitatively, this cycle will be better. Because if you, going by the history, if you saw the kind of capex which was being funded, there was clearly exuberance at that time. The lending was very easy, capital availability was phenomenal, capital markets were doing well. And you have seen what kind of NPLs happened post that capex cycle between 2013-14 and right up to 2018-19, right? So even though quantitatively you could relate, but qualitatively this capex cycle will be far superior. And there is data point. If you look at any capex cycle actually requires 4 C's. First, capacity utilization. Second, cost of capital. Third, capital availability. And fourth, confidence. If you look at it, India has done remarkably well in the last 4-5 years to get all of this together. So I feel very optimistic. And this time around, there are stark differences between the capex cycle this time and the one which you are alluding to. Like at that time, private sector effectively was leading. So 70% of the capex at that time happened from private sector and 30% was government. This time around, it is exactly opposite. 70% is contributed by the government and private sector is still lagging. Let me give you one data point which while I was reading. The best way to look at is, the capex cycle is what is the depreciation to your overall asset. So that is still 1.6%, the depreciation being provided. In the peak, it was 7.5%. So still there is a long way, as I would see. I am very sure a private sector capex in times to come will start to reflect the solidarity which I am talking about.
Sanjeev, you've been traveling across the country. You're present across segments. Are you seeing that pickup of capex coming in, especially from the private sector? As Madhu said, 70% coming from PSUs, 30% from private sector. But now we are seeing, the pickup of private sector capex coming in. And do you see this as a broad-based capex cycle which is coming in? Any geographies where we are seeing this capex building up?
Oh, first of all, thanks for having me. And I agree with Madhu. 20 years back, the capex cycle that we had, it had very different construct, both globally as well as what happened in India. But right now, if you see the conditions that existed at that time, they are absolutely different, both geographically, also what's happening in India. Now, India, if you really see the markets, earlier, 20 years back, there would be only 4 or 5 segments which used to drive the capex, and that too in very large projects. And as Madhu mentioned that, those used to go in power, steel, and some large, core sector projects, and they resulted in PAs later on. But now, we are looking at, from our perspective, we are looking at about 23, 24 market segments, which are very wide and deep across the geography of the country. And some of them are the companies which are listed, but a lot of businesses are happening in the private side. And they don't necessarily need not be very large, but there are the size, the number is quite high. So you can see the distribution of investment is across the geography in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities.
And if you look at the players who are involved in the capex, is there a differentiation in terms of the capex being brought on by the players vis-a-vis what we saw in 2003, 2008? What kind of players are now looking at capex?
So the construct has changed, as we said. Uh, see, in 2003, around that time, you'll see we had the 3G launched, and everybody was talking about a killer application they require on the phone before 3G can be relevant for the people. Everybody was very excited. But that means that time the digital era was not there. So we never used to talk about large data centers at that time because Google and Facebook types of the services were just they were just forming, and internet was in its nascent stage. But now what you can see is the data center, for example, globally as well as now in India, is scaling up. So that's a new segment in itself. And last 2022, I think we have put together data centers worth close to 650 megawatts. You put another 1 year, it becomes 1300 megawatts. So that's a kind of a multiplier effect you have. And if you take it forward 2030, you will have $23 billion invested only in the data center as an investment space. And that's perhaps the biggest real estate game in the town. So that's one construct, and there are many other segments as well.
Madhu, you agree with that? The construct of the capex and the players have changed and the sectors have changed?
Clearly,
and is it sustainable?
Clearly, that's what I was mentioning. Last time, maybe the private sector was leading, and within the private sector, 60% of the capex was done by the top 10 corporate houses. But if you see today, that number is maybe merely like 35%, which is constituted by top 10 corporate players. Also, there are a lot of new sectors which have come up, and also it is happening because of disruption. Like, take for instance, clean energy. That was only a word 20 years back.
Yeah.
Today, clean energy is reality. We can't, the fact that we face such enormous heat in this season itself is clearly indicating that what is the times to come, what kind of global warming we are going to have. So the clean energy, now you and I can't even estimate what kind of capex will be required. But what we are able to see in the ground, right? Everyone, and these are power plants. When we were doing in the last cycle, a power plant took 6-7 years because we are doing a thermal way. Today you can make a power plant in 6 months. Like if you do solar or if you do wind, you can actually start producing power in 6 months. So there, like Mr. Sharma spoke about data center. So I think the capex is extremely broad-based, and it is also happening because of the disruption which is happening around the world and specifically in India.
You're wearing an investment hat. Tell me opportunities which are there to play in this capex cycle and how you play that opportunity.
It's a buffer out there. You have to choose. As my guru and mentor used to tell, that it's a buffet out there. You eat whatever you can digest, but just remember, you don't overeat. So I think there are plethora of ways by which you can play this. My favorite theme is obviously the infrastructure side of capex, and also this China plus one. Given that this PLI, in my opinion, when we talk maybe 10-15 years down the line, would have been the biggest game changer for India. Because what people are not realizing, by giving maybe 3 lakh crore rupees of PLI incentive spread over 14-15 sectors, the government will generate 60 lakh crore rupees of revenue in this time frame, right? If you calculate GST on that 60 lakh crore, whatever number which you want to assume, it will be multiple of what they're actually being able to give. Forget the income tax, forget the benefit which you'll get by job creation and all. And this will enable that a lot of industries which are kind of uncompetitive in India, let's say mobile manufacturing.
Yeah.
In the earlier panel, it was being spoken. Now, the EBITDA margin typically for a mobile manufacturer in China is 3%, right? Here, if you're giving 5% incentive on the top line, of course, I will be competitive, right? So the PLI change itself is going to be a big thing to watch for. So manufacturing, which is specifically China plus one, and infrastructure-led capex.
How do you look at the companies going for capex from a balance sheet point of view? If I were to compare from a 2003-2008 period to now, how are Indian companies placed with respect to balance sheet?
Phenomenally well. And that again, taking a data point, the peak of debt to equity, peak, I'm saying 2010 something, it was 85%. Today that number is 54%, right? So corporate in India, when we are also talking to people across, obviously through our investment we talk, corporates in India have significantly delivered. और मैं आपको बोलता हूँ आजकल लोन लेने वाले को लोन देने वाले से ज्यादा डर है, बिकॉज इतने सारे लोग जेल में चले गए ना, देने वाले भी और लेने वाले भी. So that whole culture, in my opinion, has changed. Borrowers have become far more responsible than at least what I have seen in my career. Even when I go to Delhi and meet real estate players, they also want to be debt free. You know, so obviously corporate balance sheets have improved very, very meaningfully in the last 10 years. The banking balance sheets have improved. When did you hear a public sector bank has provided 75% of their gross NPL as provision coverage? I've never seen these numbers in my career. So both bank, household, as well as the corporate balance sheet are in a far better shape, according to me, than it has ever been. Forget the last cycle.
Sanjeev, you interact with many companies across sectors. Do you concur with what Madhu is saying? That balance sheet is not an issue at this point in time, and it's more, the direction in which they want to put the capex.
Yeah, I think that's true because it also reflects in your receivables, right? Earlier, the receivable cycles used to be very long. Whether now it's a small player or it's a medium-sized player or a large player, when you deliver your services and products, you get paid on time. So that shows in your cash flows and the receivable cycle.
And for a change, even government is paying on time.
Absolutely.
Good. And do you see a lot of small and medium enterprises now getting involved in this kind of capex?
They are. You should know that underlying, there are two types of capex which is visible. One is the so-called motherhead plants, wherein some integration takes place. But then you have a lot of value chain providers who provide the machinery, equipment into these things. Earlier, what used to happen, say many years ago, a lot of stuff used to get imported as a full machine. Now what you have is that our entrepreneurs in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, they have absorbed those technologies and they have a capacity and capabilities with the younger generation to put those things together and also put quite a bit of digitalization on it. So quite a few sophisticated machines are now built here which used to be imported. So quite a bit of value chain which was imported has spread into the manufacturing sector or in the private sector. So that again is another area where the new market has formed.
Madhu, one of the big sectors is transportation. We've seen a huge capex coming into the transportation sector there. How do you see this picking up and the kind of opportunity that exists for investors in this sector?
So even within transportation, there are three sectors which are doing exceedingly well compared to past. One is road. Second is railways, which is massive increase which we have seen in the last few years in the railway budget, in the kind of spending which is happening. And third is aviation. The last week only I was reading the number. I didn't understand what kind of jump we are talking, the number of planes which will be required, the number of airports which will be required, the number of passengers which will travel. It's just a spreadsheet right now, but it looks, with the economy, it will grow. I would like to talk more empathetically about railways. The remarkable change, as Sunil was saying, I couldn't believe, I felt so proud as an Indian traveling in the Vande Bharat train. We went from here to Surat, absolutely neat, clean, phenomenal service, very good bathrooms. I could not imagine that it is Indian Railways, right? And we are talking about they being rolling out 1,000 or 2,000 such trains over the next 10, 12 years. So the amount of money which will be required to do this will see massive amount of capex even within railways to happen.
Sanjeev, that's a sector that you are very well into. How do you see that capex translating into opportunities for companies like you?
I think railway, they are getting started now because their ability to absorb new technology and willingness to absorb new technology and experiment with new technology, I think that has given a lot of confidence not only to them, but also all the partners in private sector supporting them. And they're giving them a lot of flexibility to participate in building the railway network, be it moving away from diesel locomotives to complete electrification. So that itself has been quite a large capex by railways. Then putting new trains on it, then the air freight, the freight corridors. So you can see that the backbone of India is being rebuilt in terms of how the freight will move in future, and also how people will move from, say, shorter distances where the planes are not so efficient to fly. So I think that journey has started, and that confidence in, without importing technology, putting it together here and attracting the best of global technology and using the best of local, players to put them together is happening. And we are seeing those numbers in our books. And you can see that whatever was the diesel side of the business, that has gone down, but on the electrification side, it has ramped up.
I was about to come to the electrification journey that we are taking place in the transportation sector. You think it's a huge one. Finally, moving to passenger cars as well.
So I think electrification journey, as I said, if you are in Europe, Central Europe, you by default people take train to travel 4 or 5 hours distance. So I think this railways, the new railways, as Madhu said about Vande Bharat, people will take these short distances by these trains as you put 4 or 5 years and more trains on it, and then longer distances will be the planes. Now, when it comes to electrification and the EV side of it, that's another story which is developing. You can very clearly see that on the two-wheeler side, that transition has taken quite quickly. Three-wheeler side also, I think quite a good movement is there. And especially when you have the fleets wherein you have, say, the cars which are provided as taxi service. I think there again the pickup is very good. Like say you have a service in New Delhi called Blue Smart, which is dedicated as an EV player, and they offer very good services and they are ramping up. But when it comes to passenger cars, I think that will require public infrastructure to do the charging. We are in that charging space. We can see movement is taking place there, but I think it will be a journey to be done in that area.
What kind of opportunity you see, Madhu, in that electrification journey, especially in the cars and auto space?
No, it's not yet begun, Sanjeev. I think the amount of combustion vehicles which needs to be replaced by electric vehicles, and as it again comes to that point of carbon neutrality, it's not a choice anymore. It's by compulsion that you have to do it, or it will get done, right? So if you see yourself, when you even go in a city like Mumbai, how many cars can you identify which are electric vehicle, and how many cars are the old combustion vehicles? The answer is in front of you, that I can't even identify one car out of 100 which are like electric vehicle. So agar ye Mumbai ka haal hai, so you go to any smaller city. So it is just beginning, It's a really long way to go. And there will be various ways to play it in the stock market, and not a lot of listed companies which are there right now. But I am sure a lot of companies which are either ancillary or into battery or into electric vehicle, a lot of variety of companies will come.
No, he spoke about the battery and he spoke about data centers as a new area. Battery storage is something which is emerging. How big an opportunity is it?
So one has to, before we size up an opportunity, you have to look into the underlying trend, which I think is being driven in India and by the Indian government. We want to move away from fossil fuels, right? That's the underlying trend, because 85% of the fossil fuels are imported, and we don't want to keep shipping money to other countries to import our energy. So I think that's one. Energy transition is being at the core of whatever is happening in this space. So what's happening is then the renewable energy, I think we have made quite a leap in that area, especially in the solar energy, followed by wind and hydel. And also now the hydrogen is on the experimental stage. That if you really successfully execute over a period of time, your dependency on the fossil fuel goes. Railways moving away from diesel engine and having the electric locos and electrification all across again goes in that direction. So electric vehicles is again is part of the same equation. Now, when it comes to batteries, the renewables are available, solar, especially during the day. So what you need to do over a period of time, not only provide batteries in the EV vehicles, but also spread those batteries across the grid so that when the renewables are generating energy, you are able to store that energy for the night and you put it into the grid. If there is a deficiency of the power, these batteries can back them up. So it's not only the EV side, but also the battery storage is going to be a big segment and quite a significant segment in future. So different components will play for the energy security. You will have solar, wind, hydro, then you have, the battery storage and hydrogen. They will play a mix so that they can have a significant impact on dampening down the fossil fuel and also, same thing is connected into the sustainability strategy, whatever is agreed in the COP 26 and, the commitments we have made to, reduce the GHG emissions in the country. Yeah.
I was reading some data points that the infra spending is happening, but within the infra spending, household infra spending is taking a big leap, or the growth is much more faster. And can you give us some idea of how it's moving, and especially automation and household technology, which is playing a big role in this household infra spending?
So I would say in the infrastructure space and also in industries, one new big theme is, apart from energy transition, energy efficiency is a big theme. Because I think one data point is that anything that we produce in this country, it uses 30% more energy relative to some other places. So that means the component that we use to convert the grid energy into machine energy, I think we are not using efficient components. So that's one large space, be it how the energy efficient motors, the drives, and also the automation of the buildings that we do. You should know that about 70% of the buildings which will exist in 2030 are yet to be built. So if you continue to build the buildings the way you do today, potentially you will use more energy. But if you use automation and do a lot of sensorization in that building, one is it will be much more better for the humans, but at the same time, it can consume 30% less energy. So that's another area of transition which is happening on the commercial side of the buildings as well as on the residential side of the building.
Madhu, what kind of multiplier effect it can have?
So you can see the multiplier, whether you see the demand of steel, or you will see the demand of cement, or whether you see the demand in the digital side. I think that is very, very clearly visible, because the capex in that sense is the biggest multiplier for the economy. So when you build a road, you just don't build a road. You consume cement, you consume steel, you employ people who in turn go and spend. So that, I think, that's how the whole economy actually gets momentum. And I would just like to revisit my point that even if you are comparing yourself to 2004 and 2008-9 cycle, we have just begun. And qualitatively, this cycle, in my opinion, will be far more superior than what we experience in any cycle in India in terms of capex.
One question that comes to mind is basically the cost of capital, right? How do you see cost of capital at this point in time as compared to 2004, 2008? And do you see we are a better place in terms of cost of capital if we are going to empower?
The weighted average, to begin with, it looks good, because we have seen possibly worst of inflation. We have seen possibly worst of global events also vis-a-vis inflation, right? And the bond yields are still only 7.5%. If you see what happened in 2000, after the 2008, they went berserk. The inflation went berserk. So in the beginning of the cycle itself, we are seeing maybe interest rate might have peaked out at 25 basis here or there. The second is weighted average cost of capital. If you see, weighted average cost of capital is cheaper as compared with the last cycle also. Because obviously the equity valuations are clearly more expensive than what they were in the last cycle. So I think considering that the capacity utilization in a lot of industries are at 75, 80, 85%, 0.25% interest rate will not matter here or there. But I think availability of capital and the cost of capital both are favorable for a capex cycle.
And capital is much more available now.
Available, of course. And
Sanjeev,
from multiple sources.
Sanjeev, do you see that on the boardroom, you see more discussion on the quality of capex and the returns now as compared to earlier?
Well, I think as Madhu said, there's much more responsibility in terms of how the capital is being deployed. And also there's a lot of pre-testing done before the capital is being deployed, whether you are going to really make it in that project. So there's much more safeguards. Now, when it comes to the companies, it's very clear that, our balance sheets are good. A lot of companies are debt-free. They have good cash on the balance sheet. Now, what they will do? Now, as the capacity utilization goes up, given the economy is doing well, one is that you will have the organic expansion of the, your factories, as well as more money spent on the productivity measures on the existing factories will take place. And plus, when the consolidation takes place in certain market segment and certain product segment, naturally you can utilize capital to bring more, the inorganic, inputs to your portfolio by bolting on some new technology. It could come from startups. It could come from some other companies who can add value. So that's what the discussions are at the board level, how to use capital in different ways.
And do you see it redefining capacity, supply chains, because those are some of the key words today used in all boardrooms, especially supply chain, global supply chains. Do you think that supply chain is getting reorganized in a way through this capex?
It is. I think, given what has happened in recent past, 20 years ago, I think everything was going in one direction. One country stepped up and kind of really became the supply chain supplier of the world. But now I think it's on the reverse cycle. Everybody is onshoring and everybody is doing friendly shoring. So in the sense, you've got to be friends of the large markets. And if you do that, then naturally you get a lot of benefit of supply chain being built into your own shores.